Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing all of the books that I read for April 2022. So let's get started. The first book that I finished in April was The Score by Elle Kennedy. This is the third book in the Off Campus series, and I will say that I already anticipated this being my least favorite, and I predicted correctly because this follows Dean and Allie. Of course, it is a contemporary romance. It's a friends with benefits to lovers situation. There are clingy exes involved, illness, and death of a loved one. I will say that the death wasn't a main character per se, but someone who had been mentioned before. And I wasn't even shocked, if anything. I didn't feel any attachment to the character, so I couldn't really get in the same headspace as Dean was. But I will say the level of grief that they are experiencing, it was just overall, I just felt like, there are ways to handle grief. And for someone who's been so privileged and entitled all his life, he was not handling it at all. So, with that being said, Dean has a high sex drive, and Allie just got out of a long term relationship. So, neither of them expected to sleep together, but when they do, Dean just can't help but not forget about her. So, he somewhat pursues her in order to continue their benefits situation. But of course, over time, they start to develop feelings and yada yada yada. I will say that some of my favorite parts include, the initial morning after, the meeting with the ex for Allie, them meeting in the club alleyway at night. Those are some cute moments, but the ending was just not where it was at. I'm kind of annoyed about the consequences that occurred. It's just overall, this was a big miss for me. I did give it 3 out of 5 stars because it was average, but I definitely could have given it 2 as well. But I was, still feeling a little generous at the time. So, with that being said, I'll get into the next one. The next book that I read was The Bride Test by Helen Huang. I did listen to the audiobook on Hoopla, and this is a contemporary romance. There's close proximity in here, immigrant life representation, there's autism representation, some grief mentioned as well, and single parent. I will say that Kai's mother literally brings Esme to America in hopes that they will wed by the end of the summer. So, some of my favorite moments include just about anything Esme was doing around the household, whether it be cutting down a tree with a knife or cooking with sauces that Kai just felt the need to air out. If you're familiar with Patisse, you know what I'm talking about. So, that's just pretty much what I was getting out of those moments, and it was really endearing, but also kind of funny because they're just getting used to each other's habits. They do attend quite a few weddings in here as well, including Michael's and Stella's from the previous book, which I enjoyed. I will say that May did pursue an education as well because she wasn't quite adapt to English, or, of course, having to adapt to society because she's new to America. So that was really sweet in here. I did enjoy the fact that she was looking into her background because she didn't know her father, and her father was American. So that was interesting to follow in here, and Kai was very helpful in those regards. So, yeah, this I gave 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Mila Vane. This is the first book in her series titled A Gathering of Dragons. I will say that it's written in third person, but each chapter does indicate which character you are following between Madoc and Yvain. This does include violence, abuse, disability representation that was caused by injury, level of grief in here, trust issues in here, guilt, etc. But of course, the happily ever after, because a romance without that is a tragedy, and that is not what I read. But this does have Madoc seeking vengeance for his parents who were murdered by his enemy, but said enemy had a daughter, and that would be Yvain. She is expected to become queen, so he intends to go after her. But upon their first meeting, Yvain convinces him to form an alliance because she too wants to seek vengeance against her father for reasons that are yet to be revealed. But I will say that this was immaculate. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it immensely, as I already said, but some of my favorite moments include, of course, their first meeting, and Yvain is strong, but she is physically weak, at least when they first meet, and that again is for reasons that later unfold throughout the book. I enjoyed the learning archery because they do live in war ridden times and there's battle involved. They do have to fight magical animals. There's also some godly creatures around. So they are, I guess, given prophecies or gifts by godly figures. There's also some close proximity situations in here, Moon Knight and enjoyment. So yeah, those are just some of the tidbits that I enjoyed. But again, I enjoyed this immensely, and I did continue on with the second book. However, I have yet to finish it, and that will be in next month's wrap up. But this was an excellent start to the series. Next, I continued with the McLean Brothers series by Alexandria House, listening to the audiobook of Let Me Free You. This is the fourth book in the series. It is a contemporary romance written in first person, dual perspective, so you get to see both point of views. I will also say that it does include a mention of suicidal thoughts, alcoholism, marriage of convenience for sure. And yes, so as I get into this, Neil is essentially prompted by his brother Everett. Everett was the hero from the first book, and he's one of Neil's older brothers. So he is prompted to marry Sage before she is deported back to Liberia, and they have an immediate attraction to each other. So it felt very instant. But I will say some of my favorite moments include the involvement of family, saving things until the wedding night, Neil showing up for Sage at a convention, and Uncle Lee Chester's shenanigans. He is one of the McLean brothers' relatives, and that was very enjoyable to witness. Although this was a cute story, I did feel like the key topics of alcoholism and mental health were glazed over. They could have been more entwined with the story, but I digress. I still found this fairly enjoyable. And I gave this about 4 out of 5 stars. There are some tidbits of mystical elements as well, but again, it could have been more enriching for the story. But I digress. Still a fairly decent read, and I did proceed to the next book of the series. The next book that I finished was The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. I will say I did listen to the audiobook again on Hoopla, and this, unlike the previous books, is written in first person dual perspective. The author did previously talk about it as well, that she was going through something personal when she was writing this, and to make it more immersive for the reader, she made it first person, which I appreciate because again, it puts the reader in the character's shoes and you actually experience it with them. And you're able to empathize more, which I certainly did and was able to relate as well. This is a contemporary romance, and it does include a cancer survivor, autism diagnosis, verbal abuse, neglect, and death of a loved one. So, when her boyfriend decides that they should see other people, Anna does just that and decides to sign up for an online dating app. There, she matches with Quan, and Anna has to deal with her family's expectations for her, but Quan was understanding and patient the entire time. He has his own insecurities because of his personal situation and quirks. My favorites include, his tattoos and him being insecure when he doesn't need to be. Also, he rides a motorcycle. I didn't think I'd like it, but I did. I thought it was really cute. But yes, so I appreciated their development throughout the story. I will say some of my favorite quotes as well. One of them would be, just because something isn't perfect doesn't mean we need to throw it away. And that is what Quan said to Anna during their first in person meeting. And she is definitely a perfectionist in addition to her quirks. So I thought that was very cute. I will also say that Anna was thinking to herself when she learned of her diagnosis, no one should need a diagnosis in order to be compassionate about themselves. And again, that is a beautiful quote in here. I also resonated with that because not that I've been diagnosed with anything, but I definitely feel like I need to be more compassionate and fair to myself, and I, instead of judging so harshly and thinking I need to be somewhere that I'm not. It's just I related, and this was my favorite from the trilogy. I did give it 4 out of 5 stars because the end did feel a little bit rushed for me, but I definitely could have given it 5 stars because of how I was feeling. I don't know, I might go back. But this was definitely my favorite, and I do see myself revisiting the trilogy as well. Next, I continued with the Off Campus series by Al Kennedy with The Goal. This follows Tucker and Sabrina. It is, of course, written in dual perspective, first person, so we get to see both of them. It is a contemporary romance. It includes a surprise pregnancy in here, some verbal abuse and harassment as well. I will say that I didn't think this was a trope that I could appreciate that much considering the circumstance. It felt very rushed, and it was supposed to just be a one night stand, but they just couldn't get each other out of their heads. So it was very fast. And once, it's realized that, things are happening unexpectedly, they just jump into life together. And it's not a way that I felt was smooth. I mean, it felt very rushed and there wasn't a lot of drama, and I enjoy drama in my stories. So, some of my favorite moments include meeting at the bar for the first time, Tucker pursuing her, finding out about the situation. Anytime Garrett and Logan were, competing to be the godfather, which was very cute. Um, Dean was my least favorite character, and he will always be my least favorite character in the series. And his actions in this book just solidified my annoyance for him. So there's that. But this is not my favorite from the series. It's definitely better than the third book, but I still give it 3 out of 5 stars because it just doesn't live up to what I was hoping for. I continued on Hoopla by listening to the audiobook titled Entreat Me by Grace Draven, or Draven, however you say her last name. This is written in third person, and of course, it is a fantasy romance, as you can tell by the cover. It is Beauty and the Beast inspired, or at least that's the vibe I'm getting from the story. Fantasy romance, there's curse involved. Both male figures are widowed, and there is violence in here as well. So Ballard was cursed by his dying wife and raised his cursed chosen son, Gavin, over centuries, and the pair fall in love with a pair of sisters. So Lou was the eldest and was a Spitfire who sought to protect her sister, who was 8 years her junior, and Ballard was captivated by her. So some of my favorite moments include any assistance with bathing, the rescue through the broken ice, nursing to health, the red cover dress. There's a moment that they share during ceremony, and it was nice. You just have to read it to understand. But also the promise of commitment and proposals. So, those are just some tidbits from the book that I really enjoyed. And I would have enjoyed this more for sure if I had a physical copy, which I still intend to get. The beginning was a little confusing for me because you were still just being introduced to the characters and into the world building. I will also say that they did have, very unique names that I wouldn't have gotten confused with had I had a physical copy. But listening to it, I had to, slow down my normal speed, which isn't that fast to begin with. But I had to slow it down almost to normal because I couldn't keep up with what they were saying and their names, and just some conversation was getting lost in the sauce for me. But yeah, since I went in blind, I didn't realize that it would be a Beauty and the Beast retelling ish, and that the king and his son would both be cursed. So I thought that was a really nice touch, and I do plan on reading some of her other books, including the Phoenix Unbound and that series with it. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. On Hoopla, I continued with Rules for Heiresses by Amali Howard, and this book follows the Princess Stakes, which I did read already, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was average for me. It had its flaws, but it's still worthwhile. Whereas this one, I enjoyed it more so, and it is, of course, written in third person, historical romance, marriage of convenience in here, somewhat second chance, and I will explain why I say somewhat. It also does include bigotry and crime. So Ravenna fled London and was in disguise in Antigua when Courtland, yes, that's his name, corners her, and his grandfather's solicitor finds him, declaring him now the new duke. With Ravenna still in disguise, Courtland assumed that she was cheating when they gambled, and so he forces Ravenna to come clean, and essentially her identity is proven then and there. Because they are found in a compromising situation, they have to get married and return to London. So I will say that this does have Cortland as a, an eighth, I believe an eighth Creole. So he's technically a mixed blood, and he wasn't really accepted among the ton because of that circumstance for him. But I did appreciate the way it was, you know, addressed in this story. Um, just putting it in context with, you know, people who are very blue blooded and very entitled and set in their ways, whereas Ravna was very open minded, and as was her family, they were adapting more so than the other people that they usually were involved with or connected to. I appreciated that he was of color and that they addressed the fact that his mother was a commoner. He did experience bigotry and prejudice, of course. Then Ravna, she was also had her own issues with bigotry because she is still a woman and she didn't have as much freedom as a man. So again, that is of course addressed in here. But I would definitely read another book about Cortland's sister, Bronwyn, I believe is how you pronounce it. But yes, this book was more interesting than The Princess Stakes. I am unsure if there's something due to come out after this book, but if there is, I'm not opposed to reading it. So, moving on. Next on Hoopla, I completed the McLean Brothers series with Let Me Please You by Alexandria House. This is the fifth and final book following Kat and Tommy. Tommy is employed by the McLean brothers as a bodyguard, and Kat is the only sister of the McLean siblings. She is recently divorced and has yet to start dating again, whereas Tommy is ready to settle down. They, of course, have their attraction and start the relationship, but in secret before they decide to come clean to the family. I thought this was a very adorable way to finish the series. I enjoyed the family dynamics as always. Kat is very strong willed heroine, and Tommy very protective. Some of my favorite moments, of course, include when he is first hired to start protecting her instead of one of the brothers, and his involvement with their security, as well as, you know, them getting jealous of each other with other people, such as when they're at the club and Tommy gets jealous when Kat is clearly busy with somebody else, but, you know, in conversation. And it's just they haven't started anything yet, but you just have to read to understand. And I did give this 5 out of 5 stars because what a man. Tommy is not just Tommy, he is Tomas, he is Black Mexican American, and I loved that for him. Spanish in here, immaculate. It was perfect. I I can't even describe how like happy I was, especially considering the drastic disappointment that was the third book. I was concerned for how the next would follow and the one after that, but this ends on a high note and I appreciate it. I definitely do. Last but not least, I finished April with Dare to be a Duchess by Sapna Bogue. This follows Lara and Tristan. Now, this book is written in third person. It's a historical romance, as you may be able to tell by the cover. There's a mention of multicultural romance in here, some bigotry involved, kidnapping. You get the idea, and this is definitely a best friends, brothers trope as well. Lara was the ward of Tristan's uncle, and Tristan, also known as Wolf, always thought Lara was his younger sister's troublesome best friend. At least that is until they meet at a masquerade and they can't help their attraction to each other. There are some stolen kisses, some morning rides together, some dancing. I was enjoying this immensely, but I will say that the ending did feel a little rushed. So, with that being said, I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. I did proceed to read the next book following another character that was mentioned in this book, but you'll hear about that in the next wrap up. So, with that being said, thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm Alexis. Take care and happy reading.